Here we'll showcase some other animation techniques that you can use as well. So if you go to deform non-linear, you can also animate some of these aspects here as well, such as the bend, squash, etc. So if you're going for sort of like a very sort of like cartoony over the top sort of animation, you could use these deformers to your benefit. So if I go to squash, for instance, and I bring up the attribute editor, go to squash. Now, unlike with the objects, we had to use the keyframes in the actual where you got a keyframe in the actual timeline itself. Here, what we do is, for example, we'll go to 0. See, it's the factor one. You right-click in the factor and set key. Now, if I go to 30, change it again, do a slight squash there, set key, and go to 46, for instance. Go to 0, set key. So you'll see I can animate a slight little squash. However, if I want to do the squash whilst it's moving, so for instance, if I go to 55, move it across, keyframe it, you'll see that it doesn't really work. Why? Because how the deformers work is, this is the area of influence, and once you move the object out of it, that influence from the deformer is completely gone. So what we need to make sure is that we have the deformer parented to the sphere. So I press P, I play it again. Let's have a look. If I do that again, sorry. It can be quite hard to animate these. Squash. Need to make sure that this keyframe is deleted first. Okay. So select then select this. Press P. There. Now I have now parented the deformer to the sphere. I'll put a squash in there. And what we'll do is we'll start off from the top. Seem to have an extra one here, but yeah. Start off there, 50. Drop it down to here, keyframe it. What we'll do is, if I select the squash, go to about 46 or 44, set keyframe. As it hits at 50, give it a little bit of a squash here. Set keyframe. Probably about 60. What I'll do is move this back up. Keyframe. Set it to 0. Keyframe it. Press play now. You'll see that it will follow. I'll just slow it down a little bit so I'll go to real time. So it falls, bounces, and goes back up. You'll see that the deformer is following the actual sphere. So you may want to parent your deformer to the sphere itself. What we can also do as well is, if I just delete all these frames, for instance, delete, just going to unparent it for a second. We'll just leave it on for now. If you go to create curve tools, CV curve, you'll see that your mouse icon changes to more like a reticule. You'll see now if I click around the object, I create these little lines. These are known as CV curves. I think I might have mentioned them in a previous video, but you can use them for animations or to create an object. Once you're happy with your curve, you press enter. Now what we can do is we can set this to a motion path. Now a motion path is basically, sorry, there we are. Okay, so basically what a motion path is that we set this particular object to follow the curve around. To do that, we need to make sure we change from modeling to animation. We select the sphere, select the curve, then we go to constraints, motion paths, and attach to motion path. So you see now if I press play, it will follow that particular motion path. And how the motion paths work is, how many frames you have in your timeline is how long it'll be. So see at the beginning it's at frame 1 and it finishes at frame 200. And I can actually change this as well. So if I just undo that motion path, what I can do is I can set it so it starts at frame 30, and if I click in here I can change how many frames that we have in total. So maybe go to about 350. I could set it so we start at frame 30 and end at 350, or even less if I wanted to. If I press play now, you'll see that it doesn't start at frame 1, it starts at frame 30. So if I just zoom in here for a second and just watch the timeline. So see nothing yet right now. As soon as it hits 30, it starts to go. Now one thing you might need to make sure of is the fact that depending on your object, whatever you may have, it can angle in a very, very bizarre way. So for instance, if I attach this right now, constraints, attach, you'll see that the button is facing a different direction. Maybe I want the button to face this direction or some other direction. What we can do is, if you go to constraints, motion path, and go to the options here, if you play around with the front and up axes, it can change the angle of the ball. So if I go to Y for instance and press apply, can you see now that the ball is now angling in a different direction? Sometimes you might need to play around with it a little bit just to kind of get the angle that you need. See, yeah, that worked fine actually. It's quite easy with the sphere, but with something more complex, let's say like a car or a spaceship, you will have to play around with the front and up axes to make sure that the object is angled in the correct way. And what we can do is we can actually inverse it as well. So if I press attach, if I just control Z for a second, if I put inverse upwards, if I press attach, you'll see that it'll play backwards. If I go back to the options again, bank it, press apply. You can see you can have all these different options to your disposal. You may also want to play with the locators as well. So if I go to rendering tab, not the animation tab, I'm getting confused right now. If you go to the rigging tab, you'll see right at the far left hand corner you'll have this object called a locator. Basically, a locator is kind of like a marker to remind you to put certain things in certain locations. Or you can kind of use it as a tripod, for instance. So what I could do is I could parent the Pokeball to the locator. Press P. So now what I can do is I can parent the locator. I can parent the locator to the motion path. And now I have free reign to. Now I should have free reign to animate the ball itself. So I can go here, go around there, and maybe just move it like so. So you see now I can hand animate the object, because if you have an object that's on a motion path, you can no longer animate it. So maybe it's better to use a locator. That way you can hand animate your sphere, your car, or whatever it may be.